Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you are much further east than London. Very warm welcome to you for this super exciting EV Summit online series event. We're delighted to bring you this event in partnership with Schneider Electric. The event is entitled the Drive to Net Zero, and that really very much frames the discussion that we will be having this morning. Before we introduce our stellar lineup of speakers, I will just allow a few more people to join this morning. We had over 2,000 people registered to attend this event, so I think it will go down as one of the most widely attended of all of our online series of events so far. It's been a tumultuous year. I think we all know that for everyone. Not in the best of ways for a lot of sectors, but the battery electric vehicle sector, the e-mobility sector in particular, has, I'm sure we're all very happy to say, is doing extremely well. Lots of exciting things to report, and I'm sure many of our speakers will be touching on that. Before I do introduce the first of our speakers, I'll just allow a few more moments for people to join. We have literally hundreds of people joining us worldwide for this incredible lineup of speakers, some of the most impressive thought leaders, and not just thought leaders, but people actually delivering on the ground the real infrastructure that will change the face of the mobility landscape. So I will just run through now our list of speakers this morning. From Schneider Electric, I'm absolutely delighted to announce that we will have as our keynote speaker Mike Hughes, the president of Schneider Electric UK and Ireland, joined by our panel including Matt Allen, the co-founder and chief executive officer of Pivot Power, the incredible innovative startup in the battery electric vehicle meets EV charging infrastructure space. We're also joined by Olly, the head of CSR at DPD UK. I'm also joined by Charlie Jardine, the founder and chief exec of EO Charging, and also by Toddington Harper, the CEO of GRIDSERVE, another incredibly innovative company in the e-mobility sector. So we have an incredible lineup of speakers this morning. I'm sure we'll all learn some fantastic insights and gain some incredible understanding of the work that they are doing. So I would now like to welcome a very warm welcome to our first speaker, Mike Hughes, the president of Schneider Electric UK and Ireland. Mike joins us as our keynote speaker. Mike, thank you very much indeed for hosting this EV Summit Schneider Electric Drive to Zero event this morning. Absolutely delighted to have you join us. Mike, as an opening question, could you tell us a little bit more about Schneider Electric's work, its strategy and its mission to net zero, particularly with reference to the e-mobility sector?
Yes, absolutely. And again, let me just thank again, Ed, to be able to work together in partnering on this event as Schneider Electric. It's net zero is a topic that is extremely important for us, and it's something that we as Schneider Electric take extremely seriously. And of course, this EV journey is a major part of that. I don't know if we're able to share. I had just one or two slides. I don't know if we're able to see that as we go through. Yes, there we go. So this is just to facilitate our discussion. A little bit about Schneider Electric. What is Schneider Electric and why is this topic important for us? So we're a global technology company. We play pretty much in every country around the world. And what our whole focus is on is around this future of electrification, automation, and digitization. And I just want to get across a view of what's important to us as a company. We're a 27 billion company. We're a signed up, committed member to the 1.5 degree coalition around global warming. We are participants and active members and commitments on the EV 100, which is a commitment to have all of our vehicles electric, the renewable 100, and the energy performance 100. So we are a serious player in terms of not just bringing technology to the market that can help other companies become net zero, but we ourselves are making serious commitments on that. So we have publicly announced that our ambition is to be carbon neutral by 2025 and net zero by 2030 within our full supply chain scope by 2050. Now, these are pretty ambitious targets for our sector, but I hope it brings across the importance of the topic of sustainability and net zero to us as a company. You can see we have a very good global footprint. We operate in all of the major markets of the world. And down on the bottom, it just gives you a flavor of the markets that we work in: commercial and industrial buildings, data centers, industry, infrastructure, etc. Now, what's interesting about those is that's where the energy is being consumed. So Schneider is effectively playing in the markets where the large volumes of energy are being consumed. And of course, now transportation is becoming electric, and the EV story is a big part of that. So hopefully that just gives you a flavor of who we are and why this topic is extremely important for us.
Thanks so much for setting the scene there. So, I mean, you've just outlined how EV charging is a big play for Schneider Electric, but I know from our previous conversations that there's a wider narrative around the energy required for that sector and also for heating. Could you tell us a little bit more about that wider narrative?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to use the opportunity to just share with everybody our topic today is around EV. So if we can pull up the next slide. But EV is not existing on its own within this, let's call it the digital clean power revolution. Okay. And just a few thoughts to share with you that we see happening across those markets that we operate in, and indeed the different geographies that we operate in. Now, the EV story we will talk about in more detail, but what I wanted to get across to you is that this EV story is happening in the middle of a massive revolution around the way the whole grid and the energy has been managed. Okay? So if you just look at the messages on the slide here, if we go back to 2008, the UK, and we'll talk about the UK today a little bit, effectively had about 80 points of generation. That's 80 places in the geography which were officially generating power. And you had about 4.9% of that power coming from renewable energy. Now, if you pump forward to 2050, and obviously we're on that journey, you're going to have over 1 million plus points of generation. Now, that's a complete fragmentation of the generation side of the grid. And the projections are saying the renewable energy will up to around 85% of the energy being fed into that grid. Now, that's a massive technical challenge, not just about how much you need more power, but also where it's coming from and how to manage this fragmentation of the grid. Now, that is all happening. I'm moving to the top right. That is all happening within what is projected to be an increase of demand from around 308 terawatt hours up to 530. And you can see this has been driven by, first of all, EV. About 40% of that new demand is from EV. But look at residential heating. Residential heating is also a huge part of the net zero story for the UK. So 45% of the new demand will actually be coming from residential heating. And you have about 15% coming from the rest of the economy. So the EV story is existing within a story of grid fragmentation on generation, increased demand. And the last point is that if we get to the projected 37 million electric vehicles by 2050, you will end up for the first time in history of an electrical grid having roughly 17% of the demand, which is mobile. That means 17% of your national demand can theoretically move around and appear in a place that you may not have thought about. So it's just to share with you how the EV story is extremely important in this journey, but also to give you the background of what that is sitting on, what is behind that, and the complexity that this journey is going to be.
Thanks very much indeed, Mike. So you mentioned a little bit there about the demand side, the energy side, the EV side. Could you tell us a little bit more about the grid and the generation sides and how Schneider Electric fits into that with your ecosystem of provision?
Yeah, sure. So let's move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the way the EV market is going to generate, and then we talk about the grid. So this is, I think, the journey that everybody knows from the topic today. We're going to move from around 300,000 EVs up to a projected 6 million. The charging points will have to go from something like 20,000 or public charging points up to 100,000. And the national grid investment that will be required will be quite large. The government is putting a lot of money into this topic because, of course, there can be no net zero without the capability of the infrastructure to put behind it. But the last point I'd like to get across here is a very interesting one, is that EVs, while being a part of the challenge, are actually a huge part of the solution. So if you think about 36 million electric vehicles on the road, that actually has, just through the battery capability, the ability to deliver around 2.2 terawatt hours of power. So EVs are going to be a major part of this transition of the grid in terms of stabilizing the grid and acting through bidirectional flow of energy as a major backup capability for stabilizing the grid. So EVs are a huge part of the challenge, but they're also a massive part of the solution around how the grid is going to manage that going forward.
Thanks so much indeed, Mike. So, I mean, the bidirectional charging side leads neatly onto a question I'd like to ask you about smart charging. So with that huge rise in power, with the bidirectional side you've just outlined, there will be a really powerful role for smart charging. What's your position point on that side of things at Schneider Electric?
Yes, I mean, smart charging will be the future of EV and of the grid. So as I say, the capability to have bidirectional flow of energy will be essential in order to make the grid work. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we can see the complexity that is behind that to make that available. It's not just about obviously building EV chargers and then plugging in your car. So to make this market work and this bidirectional charging work and the whole structure of being able to run a grid like that, you have a lot of other functions, services, software that needs to be built, not just the hardware, in terms of facilitating that whole grid of the future. The fundamental piece of it will be is that you will have to be able to charge your car when it is efficient for you and for the grid, and you will have to discharge your car and back onto the grid at a time when that is also efficient and required for the grid. So this bidirectional capability will be absolutely essential to master this complexity that is coming on the grid.
Thanks so much indeed, Mike. Just a quick word for our online audience. We very much welcome questions from an online audience. So if you have any questions for Mike or indeed any of our other speakers, please do submit those questions now. Conscious that we have an all-male lineup of speakers, so if we have any questions from women in the audience, please do submit those questions to us. We're very much looking forward to seeing those questions. Mike, a final question from me before we do hand over to some questions from the online audience. There's definitely a fragmented grid that we can talk about. How does the Schneider Electric technology proposition deliver the technology required for the electrification of mobility, from distribution to battery storage and connection to the charging side?
Yes, and I think this is the exciting part of the story. So again, if we take the last slide, the technology, this is really a technology story. And the beauty of the situation is that the technologies are essentially there. They're evolving very quickly. A lot of my fellow panelists today are involved in those technologies as well. And this is just our sort of very high level overview of what that grid is going to look like. And you can see at different levels, different technologies are going to have to take place. So you have the whole story at the end user piece, which is your smart home, your smart building, your industry, the whole behind the meter story, and then how that connects to the grid, how the grid does battery backup storage, how the grid does balancing, how you switch in and out renewables as they are required. Remember that today, hundreds of millions are being spent at times when there is a large generation of wind power that cannot be used. And generators are sometimes being asked to turn off power, not to generate power. Now that could all be going into batteries and being backing up either in vehicles or large battery backup systems on the grid, which help to stabilize it. Then you're back to distribution, transmission, and of course the whole mixed generation topic that we talked about, the fragmentation of the grid. The solution to all of this is technology. Now, as Schneider Electric, we play in a lot of those spaces, but we are not exclusive to this. We partner with many companies across the story to be able to deliver this technology grid of the future.
We'll come back onto the battery question with our second speaker, Matt Allen from Pivot Power. But I'd like to now just throw open some questions from our online audience. We've had many questions come in, Mike. You'll be delighted to hear. Here's an interesting first question from Lester Evelyn, who asks, does Schneider have any views on the AC-DC split for those 100,000 chargers you mentioned?
Yes, I mean, we are, like all companies, we are watching closely to see how this market is going to evolve. And it's not just an AC story on the charger itself. It's actually related more to that whole grid story. Okay? So, just another point to think about. It's not just AC-DC on the charger. one of the big challenges we see, particularly in the residential space, is the typical home is going to go from using around 3,200 kilowatt hours of electrical energy to something like 10 or 11. That's a 3 or 4 times increase. And you have another technical discussion going on there around saying, well, we need to move to 3-phase power in the home. So that the AC/DC charging story is linked up with a much, much wider discussion. And, as Schneider Electric, we watch always the different technology stories that are going on in the market to make sure that we try, as everybody else, to pick the ones that we believe in the end are going to be successful.
Thanks very much indeed, Mike. I'm delighted to say we now have our first question from a woman in the audience, and it's from Sarah Sloman, who I think many people would know well. Sarah asks quite a specific question about ports, Mike. So she says, thinking about the large-scale decarbonisation challenges and potential electrification of vessels, ships, how would you recommend port operators seek to invest in the required grid connection upgrades and generation storage options?
Yeah, this is a great question, Sarah, and a very relevant one and a pertinent one, of course, because the whole ship-shore connection story has been going on for a number of years now. It's become fairly well known that, when ships are coming into port, they're having to run on their diesel engines while they're sitting in the ports, and there's a desire of governments, etc., to get legislation so that ships will have to electrically connect to the port system once they come in. So there are technological solutions for that. It's purely a matter of investment. I think that discussion is still going on around who should the investors be. Should it be the ship operators? Should it be the port operators? But it is a topic that is coming. I'm very pleased that at Schneider Electric, we've already been involved in a number of those projects, particularly one up in Orkney, where they built a ship-shore connection and it's now running 100% on renewable energy. So very, very good question. Another area of the economy that is not discussed a lot, but the whole ship-shore connection topic is another major part of this transition to net zero.
Yeah, I think perhaps all overlook the fact that ships are another form of vehicle. The passenger vehicle perhaps takes precedence in much of the conversation. Here's a question from Dan Epstein, who asks, who do you think will manage the grid and how will it be rolled out with regards to the role that local authorities and other public sector bodies like TfL will have in the transformation?
Yeah, again, a very good question. I mean, I think this is a moving target. There will clearly be some kind of governance around the grid, a little bit like we have as National Grid today. But what you can see clearly, the journey has already started with the DNO companies today transitioning to what they call DSO, district service operators, where on a regional level, they are going to have to figure out how they balance their local grids, etc. I think what's going to change very much is that the behind the meter players, the large consumers of energy, buildings, industry, data centers, and it's a little bit touching back on the EV story, this concept of bidirectional contracting, of demand response is going to be a major part of how the grid will work in the future. So you're going to have a quite complex set of switching in and switching out. And this is the point I was making about fragmentation of the grid. You have a complete fragmentation on the generation side, but you're also having a fragmentation and complexity on the demand side. You're going to need some good governance and some good technology behind that to make sure that the whole thing comes together. But I think the journey has already started. And as I say, the technology is already there, and the DNOs are also quite clear about how they're going to master that.
Thanks very much indeed, Mike. Mike, there are many, many more questions that I'm going to have to leave for now, but perhaps I could share those with you and your team via other channels after this event.
Yes, absolutely. Be happy to
pick up on. So, Mike, thanks very much indeed for now. I'll come back to you with questions from the other speakers at the end, but now I'd like to hand over to our second speaker, please, who is Matt Allen, the co-founder and chief exec of Pivot Power. Lots of the points that Mike raised there, Matt, about battery storage, I think we'll come round to questions I'll ask you, and perhaps will come from our online audience. Once again, a note to our online audience. If you have some questions for Matt, please do submit those to us, and I'll be delighted to share those with Matt. But Matt, first of all, if I could just ask you to introduce yourself and Pivot Power. So I know a little bit about Pivot Power from our previous engagements. I know you're a multifaceted solution provider with power generation, e-mobility, and big utility scale non-mobile batteries connecting up with mobile batteries in the form of vehicles. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work at Pivot Power and that model, please?
Sure, happy to, Ed. And yeah, thank you very much for the invite to take part today. First off, so almost a year in now, 1 week to go until the anniversary of the acquisition by EDF Renewables and being part of the wider EDF group. So that's been a great journey to date, and look forward to the future. In terms of the question around multifaceted solutions in the Pivot Power business model, absolutely, to solve a very complex problem, which I think we would all agree the climate crisis is a complex one that needs multifaceted solutions. And so a good example, of course I would say this, is the Pivot Power business model, and what you alluded to, kind of big stationary batteries that are unlocking small mobile batteries in the form of EVs. On the what we refer to as battery co, the big stationary batteries sitting next to National Grid's transmission network, that provides system level flexibility that we need to meet our net zero requirements as stated by the government. And so we need more of that at scale, and that's a big part of what that's bringing to the party. On the other side of this, the WireCo component is addressing a lot of the regional constraints that we have in the system. That's always been a bit of a challenge. I'm sure Olly and Toddington can expand on that in a bit more detail. But so that's a big piece to what we refer to as the WireCo component, is running that power infrastructure to large EV demand centers, and whether that's buses, corporate fleets, distribution centers, taxis, general public charging, and so on. So that's how those two pieces kind of fit together in that multifaceted approach.
Thanks very much indeed, Matt. We've talked a lot now this morning about the technology side of things, the technology infrastructure. I know from our previous conversations, you and I have discussed ideas around the ideas infrastructure, needing to ensure that people are brought on board with these developments. So as you roll out your energy super hub from Oxford to other cities, do you think the ideas infrastructure, bringing people along on your journey, getting local engagement, is that an important part of your role?
In short, yes, absolutely.
Very good.
I can expand on that.
Next question.
Just leave it there. Yes.
Tell us a little more.
Yeah. So I think what I would like to reinforce, champion, highlight is there's not a single road to zero. There never was, and there never will be. There are multiple roads, and Oxford, a fantastic city council to be working with on our first project. We've worked with them very closely to understand where there is the low-hanging fruit. They know Oxford, needless to say, better than we do as a London-based company. And it's the same thing for all of our other sites. Are there lots of buses? Very few buses. Last mile logistics, taxi fleets, is it a destination kind of weekend type city hub, or is there more of a commuter belt? So it's really tapping in and understanding what they want to do. Energy Super Hub Oxford, I definitely feel, is paving the way for what we want to do with this kind of ESX model. Energy Super Hub, Bristol, Brighton, Manchester, Coventry, and so on. But I think that it really is about ideas infrastructure and collaboration and partnerships, and really understanding and tapping into what the local communities want and need.
Very good, thanks. Back to the actual technology infrastructure. I know you've talked about Pivot providing the aspirin for the headache of the shift to electric vehicles. Could you tell us a little bit how that pill popping process works from a Pivot Power perspective, please?
That was impressive. Try to see how many P's I can get into my response. And the reality is regional constraints have always been a challenge, not just in the UK, but other countries. And so a big component to that is providing this WireCo offtake power infrastructure that is scalable. It addresses not just that first megawatt of demand today, but second, third, fourth, fifth megawatt over time. and also ensuring that there is a price point that they can hang their hat on to make sure that they can scale the aspirations and desires. The electrification of transport, just like the mass scale rollout of renewables, it presents a challenge. I mean, anything that is new, unique, and so on does present some real world challenges. The system was not built for the electrification of transport. We have a very aged system, and we're kind of working within those constraints around it. So it does require some kind of thinking outside of the box approaches and how that will all come together. But I think it does start with one of the less kind of exciting components to all this, but where is this copper going to come from? Where is this power infrastructure going to be delivered from? So that is kind of a starting point. Where's that juice going to come from and be delivered to as we scale?
Very good. Could I ask you to do a little bit of bigger picture thinking now then? I know from previous conversations we've had that you've said, that there's a huge system that's been established and enormous changes that have happened over the last 20 years with some future gazing. Where do you think we'll be in the next 20 years? What do you see the journey of the next 20 years as holding for us?
Crystal ball thinking. If I think of the last 20 years, you could kind of look at it as a bit of a seed planting exercise, not to undermine any of the fantastic developments that have actually taken place. I think there's a lot to be proud of, and it is paved the way for what we think, I think globally is a very realistic outcome of meeting net zero targets and addressing the ever growing climate crisis. But the next 20 years, although I would cut that in half, we need to figure this out by 2030. And that is, we need to see the planting of these seeds. We need to see some real growth. And that is what's going to be happening, both on kind of the infrastructure side, what the kind of component and the makeup of our electrons are coming from. But one of the things I think that we kind of forgot to do during this large mass scale deployment of fantastic renewables infrastructure is embrace the system level flexibility that's required. We're seeing curtailment in dumping of subsidized electrons in Scotland coming off of wind. We're seeing the same thing in the south in terms of solar generation during peak times, and that's a bit of a travesty. So how do we make sure that we have these, like I refer to them almost as sponges, filling up with that excess water and pushing that out during times of higher demand and need. So this is about growth on the EV side. I think the last 20 years, I mean, the EV rollout has been happening pretty much since the advent of the combustion engine vehicle. But we're starting to see more models, the pace of deployment and uptake. We're seeing cost curves come down, and all of that will continue, absolutely, and at scale. But we've gone from planting of seeds, and now it's all about growth and really accelerating. Very
good. Thank you very much indeed, Matt. Again, if we have any questions from our online audience, then please do submit those questions. Another final question from me then, Matt, before we go over to online questions from our online audience. I know in previous conversations, you and I have talked about predictable mileage being a sweet spot for Pivot Power with vans and buses and the predictable mileage that those vehicles offer. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that side of things is part of your business model?
Sure, happy to. Again, I'll defer to the experts that are living and breathing this, being Olly and Toddington. But predictability in this electrified transport world is a fantastic thing. It is, again, welcome this to be challenged, especially from Olly. But when it comes to distribution vans and fleets and so on, we have a very good idea on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the miles that will be used for that vehicle. And that's a really good starting point. It's the same thing for buses. Less so, but I'd also put taxis into that same bucket. So with the big, and that's a significant amount of the emissions that we can take off of the system very quickly. And so they know that demand on an individual vehicle level, which scales up to how many megawatts they need today and tomorrow as they really accelerate, the rollout of those fleets. So I think that is a very, very good starting point. The general public, we don't know exactly how many miles we're going to drive every single day. We don't get me wrong, we absolutely need to provide solutions for the general public to go on this journey as well. But let's start with the low-hanging fruit, and predictable demand is a very, very good place to start. So that is what I'd like to highlight there.
Very good. I will come on to, as you say, to that point again with Olly Craughan from DPD as our next speaker. But first of all, I'd like to hand over to some questions from our online audience, of which there have been many, I'm delighted to say. An interesting first question, Matt, about battery technology. The question is, what battery technology is the holy grail for grid level storage? Is there one, or is lithium ion the best option?
It's the solution that works now. And don't get me wrong, I am all for innovation. I am all for challenging technologies to step up to the incumbent ones that work. But when I get asked that question, which I do get asked on a very, very regular basis, my response is, this is a climate crisis. And when you're in the middle of a crisis, you focus on the things that work, that are investable, that have been de-risked, that have a track record. And I absolutely welcome and champion innovation to take place. But I do not want us to lose sight of the task, the responsibility that we have today. And there is a real concern that I have that innovation can detract. It can take our focus away to delivering on what we need today. So is it the holy grail? No, I don't know what technology will ever be the holy grail. Is kind of the second point I'd make there, but yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, interesting.
A good question.
Yeah. Another question, more on the kind of recruitment side, from Tim Norford, who asks, are you seeing enough of a particular skill set in potential employees in the marketplace, or is there a particular skill that you see as pivotal to the growth of the industry and that's maybe missing at the moment?
Good question, and nice use of pivotal. There is a transition. I mean, I think what we have seen over the course of the last 10, 15, 20 years in the low carbon generation renewables deployment is, it is attracted incredible talent coming from the incumbent industries, whether it's oil and gas or conventional generation. So I think we have welcomed that community of employees with open arms. I think one of the big things is this is a disruptive industry that requires a bit of a different mindset. We don't know 100% exactly how it's all going to play out. So I think it needs a slight different mentality where you're excited and not daunted by the fact you may not know exactly what's going to happen on Monday. And so I think that's a key point that I would highlight is this is a weird and wonderful journey and roller coaster, and you kind of need to be prepared for what you're getting into. But it's a fantastic time to come into this market, and we've seen incredible talent. I think that we have, of course, I would say that within Pivot Power, but many other companies that I see as well.
Well, perhaps the coronavirus world in which we live is a good culture to be in, not knowing what's going to happen on Monday. We're all very firmly in that mindset at the moment, aren't we? So perhaps good training for the sustainability sector. So Matt, there are a whole bunch more questions that the online audience would like to ask you. Maybe again, I could share those with you via other channels after the event. But for now, do please stick around for questions to your fellow panelists at the end. But so thanks very much indeed, Matt, for now. And I'll hand over to our next speaker. Thanks, Matt. So our next speaker, I'm absolutely delighted to say, is Olly Craughan, who is the head of CSR at DPD UK. For those of you who don't know DPD, they are going great guns with a shift to electrification and sustainability here in the United Kingdom. Olly, delighted to have you join us here this morning. As with all of our speakers, I'd like to just first ask an opening question. Clearly 2020 has been a year when online retail, online delivery of online retail has been in accelerated mode. It's also a year when DPD's activity has accelerated its rollout of electric vehicles. Could you tell us a little bit more about your electric vehicle side, and perhaps a bit more about the drivers and the vehicles those drivers are using?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for inviting me. For obviously, first of all, look, this year has been extremely challenging for us all. Obviously, with COVID, DPD have seen volumes increase hugely. The daily volumes that we see now are what we would have seen in our 6-week peak period on the run up to Christmas. So you can see the massive growth in there. That hasn't stopped DPD moving forward with our sustainable objectives. And as you mentioned, we'd hit our target of 10% of fleet, electrification of fleet, not just the fleet, but across the UK as well. So it wasn't limited to just the capital or a certain area of the country. It was across the UK, no matter what the geography was of the depots. And we achieved that back in July. The structure of the business is obviously our drivers are employed, and what we call owner drivers, our service champions, our brand ambassadors that are self-employed. The electrical fleet is rolled out across that employment and staff system, and the ODFs, they take their vehicles home. So obviously charging at home instead of depot, which helps our structure and our infrastructure. And with that, with the OLEV £350 grant, we DPD actually pay £350 as well to towards the charger, which means that our owner drivers don't actually typically have to pay anything towards the charger. And once it's fitted to their home, it is theirs. DPD doesn't own it, it's theirs to keep no matter what the outcome. If they leave DPD, it's still theirs, or move house and we'll pay for another one to be fitted. So that was one of our incentives to push electrification in the business, and drivers are very happy to move towards the EV instead of the diesel vehicles. The fleet consists of numerous sized vehicles. We have some cargo bikes, something that we're looking into, working with EAV as well, who have actually launched a second generation on that sort of partnership of creating that bike and that e-bike. We use the Paxter in certain urban locations, which actually Norwegian Post use. It's like an electrical quad bike. And then the Nissan ENV is the sort of predominant vehicle of fleet due to the availability of it, the cost, and it's the vehicle that we've been able to implement very quickly. And Matt had talked about going for the low-hanging fruit. Now that's where we've gone with the Nissan. We've gone for routes that are within range of the vehicle, closer to the depot, high volume residential smaller items such as your sort of ASOS clothing bag or your mobile phone being delivered. One of the challenges for DPD now is the 3.5 ton, and we do have 100 man ETGs that have been delivered this year, and that's the vehicle that we really need to push forward with now. We do not want to be buying more smaller vans, which will create more vehicles on the road, causing more congestion. We need 3.5 ton, as any parcel delivery business will need. You know, it's the workhorse of the fleet. And the more are coming to market. The Mercedes e-Sprinter we're trialing at the moment. Maxus Deliver 9. These are vehicles that will give us the capacity to really push forward with our electrical fleet and expand it into other areas as well in the country. With that, charging, as I spoke about, is obviously a challenge, Aid. We work with PodPoint. We do have chargers at depots as well, and have future-proofed our property for the expansion of that. But public charging is a necessity, and we need us to see a bigger growth in that.
So thanks very much indeed, Olly, for that opening gambit. Really interesting to hear about your developments. On the charging side, coming back to the work that Matt has been doing at Pivot Power, do you see technologies like Pivot Power's battery storage and EV charging solution being a useful one in the DPD mix of solutions?
It's essential aid, as well as sort of the GRIDSERVE electrical forecourt. You know, we need these to help extend our reach in zero emission deliveries. You know, they will be the springboard where we could rapid charge and further the reach in delivery. Range is the issue at the moment in vehicles, and at the moment we've gone for a strategy of obviously not delivering en route, not charging en route, sorry. But there will be a point in time that we do need to further that, and these are the great opportunities to utilise the services of Pivot Power or GRIDSERVE and move forward and push that, further extend our reach.
Thanks so much indeed, Olly. Once again, to our online audience, if you have some questions for Olly Craughan at DPD, please do fire them in. We'd be delighted to share those questions with Olly. Just a few more questions from me, Olly, before we do hand over to the online audience. Let's talk about net zero then. I mean, I know that the drive to net zero is a big part of DPD's work. It's the title of this morning's online series event. Could you tell us a little bit more about DPD's commitment to a net zero strategy?
Well, just recently we launched a very ambitious strategy across Europe. We will deliver 225 cities zero emissions by 2025. In the UK, that will be 25 towns and cities throughout the UK by 2025. Huge investment, massive project. Very proud of being able to launch that project. We will need, depending on growth in the industry, we'll have a fleet of over 4,000 EVs by the end of 2025. But again, I think the biggest challenges in that will be charging. It won't be the availability of the vehicle. I think it will be the charging network. Very
good. Good. So let's look a bit at the opportunities then. I mean, obviously the vans and trucks sector that is central to your work represents a huge market opportunity for charging infrastructure companies. You've just outlined the need for that charging infrastructure. What would your message be to those companies in the charging infrastructure space, particularly maybe those that are looking to engage with DPD?
That we have nothing is off the table. Please come and talk to us, engage with us. We're willing to trial and test any sort of technology or solution moving forward. I think we need to work harder to really sort of push and accelerate government involvement and funding even further to really help this move forward. There's just not enough access to the charging infrastructure. You know, moving forward, we need it to grow even quicker and be more. There needs to be more of a common solution as well. There seems to be a lot of people going off in different directions, which, you know, for example, one of our drivers has 10 different apps on his phone to charge at various stations. And I've been made aware that contactless payments will be accelerated in charging networks by the end of the year, but we need a more common solution.
Very good. There's a follow. I'll hand over now 2 questions from our online audience. There's one which relates precisely to what you just said about that driver who has 10 apps on his phone. You've mentioned that at the moment you're not looking at solutions for charging along the way for your drivers, but are you looking at any EV routing solutions in the future to help with planning for your drivers to charge en route or not?
We're definitely. If my comment came across that we weren't looking at, we are. Initially, okay. we weren't looking at a charging solution because, as Matt said, low-hanging fruit. We know the miles that our vehicles do, and the ones within range, they're the ones that we've rolled out as electrical delivery routes because the driver doesn't have to charge. Something that DPD is a high-quality parcel delivery firm. if you've ever had a DPD delivery, which I know from our conversations, Ed, you've had plenty. You get your 1 hour window. The concern with charging en route, our predict service will be interrupted by that. The driver will need to charge, potentially turn up to the charger. There's someone already on it. They're going to have to wait longer to actually charge their vehicle. And then for the rest of the day, every single consumer who has had their 1 hour window, it's going to be late delivery. So I've been speaking to Sam Clark at GRIDSERVE about potentially, could you get a booking service where you book a slot? So we could incorporate that into our optimization of route. So the driver knows when they're going to need their charge and when they've got their break. It's in there, incorporated into the route. The charger, at charge station, has been then allocated for their block of time. They know that no one's going to be on the charger. They're straight on, charge and go.
Very good. Thanks. The question of hydrogen has come in from Richard Amanaguma. He asks, are you looking at hydrogen, and if so, for what vehicles?
We've gone for the all-electric sort of path and we're focusing at the moment with our final mile delivery vehicles. So for me, electrification and the business, that is the path to go down. Hydrogen, potentially with HGVs and larger vehicles. Our partners, our other business units in Europe have been fortunate enough to test a class 1 vehicle that's fully electric, but the costs are huge, and there's limitations to some of those vehicles. So it's something we're keeping very close to, but our focus is to roll out final mile delivery solution in an all electric fleet and keep a close eye on what's happening in the heavy goods sector.
That's a similar kind of answer to the one that Matt Allen gave, that if there are technologies that are available now with the need for decarbonisation, let's deploy those existing, perhaps more readily achievable technology solutions. There's another question coming from Darren Meads. He asks, if the plan is to have an all-electric fleet, what happens with the current fleet?
We have a lifetime on our vehicles anyway, so they will be defleeted and recycled. We'll find the right way of defleeting them and ensuring that they're sustainably done so as well.
Very good. A final question then, Olly, from the online audience. He asks, are DPD looking at perhaps adding additional batteries to vehicles to increase the range?
Well, then the problem is typically with more batteries, they weigh more, which means the payload of the vehicle is less. The 3.5 ton electric vehicle actually has typically a smaller load area than a diesel equivalent as well, while costing typically £20,000 more than a diesel equivalent as well. So adding more batteries and going further has its challenges, because there's a point, and this is where actually being able to utilize a pivot power solution or a GRIDSERVE solution, a rapid charging a vehicle to then extend the range is actually better, because you're not sacrificing payload. Again, you're going to have more vehicles on the road because they can't carry as much weight or parcel volume. So there's a tipping point.
Thanks so much indeed, Olly. Olly, for now, those are the questions from the online audience. Do stick around, and I'll open up the floor to questions between you and your fellow speakers at the end. But for now, Olly, thank you very, very much indeed for your insights from DPD. Olly, thanks very much once again, and I'd like to hand over now to Charlie Jardine. Charlie is the founder and chief exec of EO Charging, a super exciting UK startup in the charging infrastructure space. Charlie, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us here this morning on this Schneider Electric EV Summit online series event.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks very much indeed, Charlie. And so as an opening gambit question, I know you founded EO Charging around 6 years ago now. Could you give us a sense of the changes you've seen in that time on the transition to the electrification of transport?
Yeah. So we started EO in 2015, and at the time there were very few electric vehicles in the market. Nissan Leaf, Renault Zoe, there was the G-Wiz was still knocking around, and actually the vehicles were being bought mostly by consumers. So from our point of view, a lot of the charging stations that we've sold up to this point have been the home charging stations. So obviously, if you buy an electric vehicle for yourself, you're going to try, if you have a driveway, to charge at home, and that has been our market, and there's actually been the majority of EVs that have been sold have been to consumers. I'd say back end of last year and certainly this year, despite COVID, the shift has really changed. So the shift really is moved on to fleet. And for us, fleet includes obviously companies that give employees vehicles, and in the same vein, those vehicles are being taken home to people's driveways. And those vehicles are often cars, but of course, in the case of DPD, those vehicles are vans. And actually that drive has been heavily led by the government. So if you look at things like the benefit in kind incentives on electric versus petrol and diesel, benefit in kind on an EV is about, it's 0% versus up to 37% on petrol and diesel. So for an employee, having moved now into an electric vehicle, I can save myself hundreds of pounds per month on benefit in kind tax. So for us, again, it's this year certainly that shift to businesses adopting vehicles has really taken place, and that is not just cars going back to people's driveways and potentially even charging it in the workplace, but it's also this emerging van and truck market. So obviously, Olly's done a great job at DPD and has got plenty of electric vans on his fleet, but he's still one of very few. So from an EO point of view, we're certainly seeing big companies who've got large fleets of vans and trucks starting to shift to electric, mostly driven by the fact there's now vehicles available on the market at the right price point. And of course, the surrounding climate is really encouraging businesses to make the shift quickly.
Very good. Thanks very much indeed for that opening gambit. So you mentioned the fleet side, the significance of that. We've certainly seen lots of energy and interest with some of the larger leasing companies. Presumably you've been engaging at EO Charging with some of the leasing companies to open up those opportunities. Yeah,
I mean, we work with a handful of leasing companies, and of course, they've sold many more electric cars this year than they've ever done before. And if you just look at some of the statistics from lockdown, of course, the overall sales of vehicles has dropped quite significantly. But the percentage of electric vehicles versus other vehicles like diesel and petrol is starting to outweigh those ICE vehicles, particularly diesel. For us, we work with leasing companies, as you say. We also work direct with fleets. So working direct with fleets, not that we work with DPD, but for example, they've got very ambitious plans, and they're pretty aggressive. And so for us, we try and work with businesses, preferably when they start thinking about going electric. So helping them with that feasibility. If the first question is, I want to go electric, and actually, is there a vehicle that suits my needs? The second question is often, if I do make that switch, how the heck am I going to charge them? So whilst our business is focused on selling chargers and software, actually, we do a lot more than that. It's about providing that upfront consultation. It's looking at the feasibility of going electric. It's working out what kind of infrastructure you're going to need and where. Is depot charging or workplace charging sufficient, or are you going to need to give employees charging stations at home? So that feasibility then leads obviously into providing chargers and software, and in order to do that really well, we have to install the equipment and look after it. Very good. It sounds like you
are verging on becoming a management consultant for electric vehicle charging, as well as delivering the hardware.
We're much cheaper, by the way.
Yeah, perhaps. So, I mean, some of the numbers to pick up on in terms of the growth of battery electric vehicles, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, the SMMT here in the UK, recently announced that battery electric vehicles have increased by a cool 184.3% in terms of sales this September compared to last September. So, you know, we're all benefiting from some incredible growth in the sector. You've mentioned a lot about passenger vehicles and fleets, and you've touched on vans and trucks. Do you see the vans and trucks sector as an exciting growth sector?
Yeah, for us and our business, we love doing charging stations and depots for vans and trucks. So yeah, historically in that segment, you've had some kind of startup niche vehicle providers or even vehicle converters, so converting what used to be petrol diesel vehicles into electric. And yeah, you had people like Sam Clark at Newt Cargo, or formerly Newt Cargo, who had what was a very large electric fleet at the time. He had about 80 to 100 vehicles. And once upon a time, that was the biggest electric vehicle fleet, van fleet in the country. Now, most of those vehicles were not from mainstream OEMs. What you're starting to see now, in the small van space, but also in the big van and up to small truck, is you've actually got mainstream OEMs either with product on the market or with product due to launch. So you're seeing entry from people like Fiat, VW, Ford, and yeah, for a big fleet who's got many thousands of vehicles, a key consideration is not just the product and how many miles does it do and how much does it cost, but it's also about the support network. So these things are now mission critical, both obviously the vehicles, but actually the charging stations, and having the right support network in place so that when and if things do go wrong, you can get them fixed quickly is a massive consideration to any company wanting to go electric at scale. So I think, certainly from our perspective, we're seeing that transition happen now. And there's you see every single day big press releases or commitments, and people are actually receiving vehicles. So we think it's really exciting. And yeah, look, if you're hesitant about going electric in the van and truck space, I think you need to look at the internet and see what's now currently available.
Mm. And also, as well as the incumbents, some exciting new startups like Volta Trucks in the 16-ton truck category. And obviously, the vans and truck sector is a powerful vector for decarbonising transport in a way that is perhaps more interesting than the passenger vehicle space. So thanks very much indeed for that. Again, if there are any questions from the online audience, and there are many coming in, then please do pose those questions to Charlie. I'll open up to online questions to Charlie in a moment. But first, a couple more questions from me. The software side, Charlie. So you're typically known as being a hardware business, but I understand the software side of things is an increasingly interesting business proposition for you at EOCharge. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing on the software side? Yeah,
sure. So when we look at fleet, we look at two types of customers. So one is a van fleet that does last mile delivery, even maybe middle mile. But those vehicles are going into cities, delivering parcels or food or furniture, and they go back to a central depot and park up for 8 to 10 hours. So if you start to think about, I'm a big fleet, I've got 100, 200 plus vehicles going back to a depot at night, which are currently petrol and diesel, and I want to switch those to electric. Well, clearly there's a significant consideration about power and the feasibility of doing that. So from an EO point of view, just making smart plugs that charge and maybe do some kind of on-site load management, what we're starting to think about and provide in our software is more of an integrated solution. So if you can envisage a depot with 100 or 200 vans, they go and deliver parcels during the day, they come back at roughly 5 o'clock, they plug in. That's a huge surge in power. So, how does EO help the customer manage that? So, firstly, you've got a device that sits on site, looks at what the building is using. So, what's the building currently using, and therefore what's currently available to charge the vehicles. So that's really helpful. The second thing is, some of those vehicles are doing 50 miles a day, some are only doing 20, and some might be doing more like 80. And each of those vehicles has got a variable daily mileage. They also might need to leave at different times in the morning. So if you start to think about, I've got a power supply that wasn't designed for charging lots of electric vehicles at the same time. So EA's got this neat load management solution, but actually you've now got energy tariffs that are what we'd call time of use, so expensive at 5 p.m. and much, much cheaper at midnight, for example. If EO understands from the vehicles the state of charge of the battery when they each plug in, and then we understand the departure time, and we know that energy is much cheaper at midnight rather than 5 p.m. And we know because of the load management system, we've got X amount of power to work with. And then you start to apply some machine learning to work out how the buildings and the charging stations are being used. You can then look to create a priority, which is I'm going to charge these vehicles in this order and make sure they're charged by the morning with the power supply you've got. But I'll try and do that at the cheapest price. So from a software point of view, what's EO doing in that space? It's presenting that data in a really nice, clean dashboard that the guys on site will use, but also then think about once my fleet's transition to electric, how do I optimize the cost? And the nice thing about EVs, which is different to petrol, is you've got such an opportunity to influence refueling price. So time of use tariffs could be a third of the price, and that's new with EVs. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, interesting. Questions you've never asked yourself: how much does petrol or diesel cost at 10 o'clock in the morning? So yeah, interesting new framework of analysis. So Charlie, thanks so much indeed for that. Final question from me before I throw things open to some online questions from the audience. The software side perhaps gives you opportunities for international growth. Could you tell us a little bit more about your plans for international growth?
Yeah, so with the software in mind, we've made the platform what we call hardware agnostic. So that means with the software, you might integrate other people's chargers onto it. So we've integrated ABB, chargers from ABB, chargers from Alfin, and we've got a large customer who wants us in Europe, and we're now supplying software as a service, 24/7 support and maintenance into Germany, France, Italy, Spain. So from an EO point of view, we've built this product and software, but actually the turnkey delivery model, which is the consultation up front, the installation, the maintenance, and we've built that for the UK. We've now got a customer and other customers asking us for that same service in Europe. So from an international point of view, whilst we sell chargers currently into 30 countries, this is a different model. So this is going in with a customer and deploying that turnkey solution. For us, that's a big step forward. And we started that this year, and next year you'll see us grow even further into Europe.
Very good. Thanks so much indeed. So I'll ask some questions from the online audience now. You mentioned the growth of the passenger vehicle market at the outset. Someone's asked a question about cost and the prohibitive nature of cost. They ask, when do you envisage prices starting to become competitive with combustion and diesel engine vehicles?
Yeah, I think with any vehicle, whether it's petrol or diesel, you've got quite a large span of costs. So you can get a very cheap petrol diesel vehicle for a few thousand, where you can pay a premium, get a lovely vehicle for 100. Now, if you look at EVs, you're actually starting to see electric vehicles, which we'd regard as obviously affordable, but also has cost parity to a nice alternative. So if you look at new entrants and people like MG, Hyundai, Kia, actually the price of those vehicles, we'd say are comparable with an ICE equivalent. And the benefit of an electric vehicle is, and actually the key consideration you've got to make at this point is, it's not just about the upfront price, it's about what we'd call TCO, so total cost of ownership. So yes, the vehicle might cost you a little bit more upfront, but actually if you own that vehicle for 3, 5, 7 years, and actually your refueling cost is 1/10 of the price, and you live in London, so you're not paying congestion charge, and it's a company car, so my benefit in kind is 0% rather than 20%. And you can layer on all of these costs, including the fact that EVs are much cheaper to maintain. Actually, EVs are cheaper. Yeah, so it's hard not to look at the upfront price like the EasyJet model. But I think you've got to look a bit deeper than that with electric vehicles.
Totally. I mean, I think we need to do a lot of work reframing, not talking about costs, but talking about savings. So not total cost of ownership, but total savings of ownership. There are all of those savings points rather than cost points that we could perhaps frame the argument better around. There are lots more questions from the online audience, Charlie, but we're running a little over now. So I think what I'll do is hand those over to your team via another channel off the back of this panel discussion and come back to you with those questions via other means. So thank you very, very much indeed for now, Charlie. Do stick around to ask questions of your fellow panelists at the end, but I'd like to, so thank you once again and hand over now to Toddington Harper. Toddington is the Chief Exec of GRIDSERVE, another fantastically innovative UK company. Absolutely delighted that you've joined us here this afternoon now, Toddington. So thank you very much indeed for joining us. Toddington, like the other speakers, I'd like to ask an opening gambit question and invite you to tell us a little bit more about GRIDSERVE, its mission, and perhaps your own personal mission for your work.
Sure. Awesome to be here. So yeah, GRIDSERVE. GRIDSERVE's purpose, which is very aligned to my purpose, I founded GRIDSERVE, is to deliver sustainable energy, really on such a scale that we can help move the needle on climate change. And what do I mean by that? Mike made the point that he's part of a commission, the coalition, the 1.5 degree coalition around global warming. And the thing that bothers me daily, and I just had a check before this session, is that the world is on track to hit carbon emission concentrations in the atmosphere that's going to drive the world beyond 1.5 degrees of warming, rather shockingly, within around 7 years from now. There's a link which I hope you can share with the audience that correlates IPCC data into a really visual format of a clock that ticks down. And that's an incredible issue and problem and challenge, and that isn't a challenge we can outsource to another generation. So GRIDSERVE's objective, our plan, is to deliver sustainable energy at really such a magnitude. We do that across a number of different applications, both power and transport, which we're going to talk about more. We primarily use low-cost technologies to do this, like solar energy and energy storage, but we're really trying to do it quickly. And my personal mission, my personal objective, Matt made the point really well. We are in a climate crisis. We know the problems that are coming, and if anyone hasn't seen the David Attenborough program, A Life on My Planet, I would encourage everyone to see it today. It's important. It's daunting, but also hopeful. And I want to be one of those people, I'm sure we all want to be, that in 10, 20, 30 years from now, we can say that we saw the problems were coming. It was clear. The IPCC, told us the evidence. People like Greta Thunberg did a wonderful job of helping people understand that we need to take action. And actually, I want to be one of the people that say we took action, we made it happen, and we knocked it out of the park. So that's my personal mission, and it's very aligned to GRIDSERVE's.
Thanks very much indeed, Toddington. Great to hear that passion in your voice about the need for action around sustainability. So you've outlined what GRIDSERVE is all about as a business. I know you've been working on the super successful project of the electric forecourt. Tell us a little bit more about electric forecourt, your plans for the first one and your plans for the future rollout of electric forecourt.
Yeah, sure. So we are, to kind of facilitate a mass change, it's really important that we remove any reasons why people wouldn't want to transition to electric vehicles. We take away all of the anxiety, we replace it with a positive experience, and we also ensure that the energy that people are using has to be, zero carbon, or at the very least net zero. And so what we're doing is we're helping to develop a UK-wide network. There's a combination of solutions that are necessary for charging that I completely agree with everything everybody said so far. Charging at home if you can, charging at the workplace, etc., etc. But in addition to that, we need really, really robust public charging infrastructure that just isn't going to be an issue. It is going to work, and is going to work well, and critically is net zero. And so that's what we're talking about. We've given it a simple name. We call it an electric forecourt. And it's very, very visual. And really, we hope it's a big part of the solution to give people the absolute confidence that now is the time to transition. There are no disadvantages. In fact, there's many, many advantages, including cost. I would concur with what Charlie was saying. Actually, you can deliver net zero, not just electric vehicles, but net zero vehicles today that can outcompete petrol and diesel cars. And we're about to do exactly that next month. So maybe, Aid, you could show one of the pictures. So so this is about a year ago, and again, it's very important that we deliver collectively. About a year ago, we said this is what we're going to do. We're going to build a network of over 100 electric forecourts across the UK. They're going to be powered by sustainable energy. It's going to make it as easy for anybody to charge an electric vehicle without any disadvantages at all, many advantages, and this is precisely what we're doing. So if you can kind of move to the next slide. This is a picture as of around 3 weeks ago, and hopefully people can see the correlation between those two pictures, that we've done what we said we were going to do, and it really is incredibly exciting. And just a little bit more than that, if you can go to the next slide on top of that. In addition to that infrastructure, I mentioned it's so important that we provide net zero energy as well. So in addition to building electric forecourt, we also have a solar farm, which we pair in the background, because there's quite a lot of solar power on site. But in addition to that, we have a solar farm that produces a huge amount of energy. That every kilowatt hour that will be used to charge vehicles will either be provided by a zero carbon kilowatt hour that we produce on site, or a net, or we net it off against a zero carbon kilowatt hour that we input into the grid about 44 miles up the road. And so, hopefully that's clear that we've done what we said we need to do. We collectively, and everybody here, needs to do a lot more. But it's really important to demonstrate that, this is 2020. We're in 2020. We are delivering net zero in 2020. We'll be launching a vehicle solutions piece as well, in partnership with Hitachi Capital, also next month, where every vehicle has the option to be completely net zero. And just to reiterate the point, the objective is to give people the opportunity to transition at a way that's more cost effective, i.e. costs you less money than petrol or diesel cars. And we believe that's entirely possible. And in fact, we're going to demonstrate that very soon. And just to kind of add something that we haven't told the world yet, but I guess we now have, is our plans, notwithstanding COVID, which makes life a bit more challenging, are to have the electric forecourt open, all partners operating, WH Smith's, Costa, Booths, Post Office, and a number of others, on the 24th of November, so next month, complete with the whole vehicle solutions offering for net zero transport.
Thanks very much indeed, Toddington. That's super exciting to see your plans there. I very much look forward on the 24th of November to driving my Renault Zoe to the first of the electric forecourts and charging up. And I also know you have some great interpretation, some educational materials there, which is a subject close to my heart. So very much looking forward to seeing that. You touched on technology and economics there. I know for you, you're very excited about the fact that the economics are now there. The intersection between the technology and the economics is now such that we're at a point where the kind of work that you're doing is cost effective. Could you tell us a little bit more about that side of things, please?
Yes, I will. Definitely technology, and I thought I'll also add partnership to that. So I mentioned that we work with primarily two technologies: solar energy and energy storage. My father was building solar energy projects 45 years ago. And a solar panel that he bought at that time was 99.9 something. We worked it out the other day, more expensive than it is today. So what would have cost him £1 would cost us less than a pence today for an equivalent watt peak of production. And most of that has happened in the last 10 years. and we've reached a point where, you know, where we can make clean energy at a lower cost than fossil energy, and when it's reliable. You know, effectively, if the sun, you know, the fusion reactor in the sky stops working, we won't be worried about solar panels. You know, that's really, really important, because when you combine that with electric vehicle charging, which is a much lower operating cost, and if you provide it, you know, with the lowest possible energy source, then you can help really improve the economics, particularly when you finance vehicles as well. You know, and in conjunction with that, the other technology that we work with principally is energy storage. Probably an 80% cost reduction in the last 10 years, probably more like 5 years. And the combination of the two together means that you can have energy on demand, you know, from renewable energy whenever you want it at a lower cost, and you can actually use that energy to power the most critical of applications, which is really, really important. And you know, it's because we've reached that crux in technology that we have absolute confidence that we can make it happen, because for the first time really ever, the economics are on side. It's not like the economics of climate change that the Stern Review did many years ago that said that the cost of inaction is going to outweigh cost of action. It's actually that it's less expensive, it's more competitive, you can make more money using these technologies now than the conventional ones, and that gives me hope. Just to kind of add a little bit more to it, what also gives us hope is I mentioned COVID. We're living in some really tough times, and it is really tough for many, many reasons. But actually, you know, out of this, personally, you know, what I've seen is also an opportunity for hope. You know, because the world has moved very, very quickly to transform how we act and how we operate. We're having a webinar, wouldn't be happening otherwise, I'm sure, without COVID. You know, and the fact that technology solutions you know, are viable today, that the economics works, you know, combined with the knowledge that actually now if people want to make a difference, we really, really can, gives me real hope for the future. I just want to add a bit more to that in relation to partnership, but only if we form good partnerships and get on with it. We can't start, stop. We have to put our head down, we have to crack on. And the only way to do that is if we really align well with people we get on with really strong partners, and we just deliver.
Very good. Thanks very much indeed. I'll ask just one final question, Toddington, about delivery. But just a note to our online audience, once again, if you have some questions for Toddington, then please do fire those into us, and I'll ask Toddington some of those questions. So yeah, Toddington, I know you're very passionate about the need for action. You talk a lot about delivery. You've outlined some of the incredible endeavors that you're deploying at pace around electric forecourt. But tell us a little bit more about why you think delivery is so important.
Yeah, again, reiterating a little bit about what I said, you know, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has given us unequivocal evidence that if we don't, you know, take action now, things are going to get much worse. We're already feeling it, seeing it, the impact of climate change. It's very, very clear. And the solutions are available to deliver the solutions. And actually, again, back to David Attenborough's program, there is a window of opportunity to do this and to protect species and to stop extinction and to do, you know, and to preserve our real existence if we take action now. So there isn't really much left to do apart from get on with it, you know. And that as a concept is something that we're looking to try and enshrine, and, you know, hoping others can as well, in a very simple concept of #deliver. You know, if that could be the basis of COP26, if that could be the basis of what we do, you know, it just adds forward momentum to the issues that we're facing. You know, we don't need to debate it anymore. We don't need to find the solutions. They all exist. We just need to crack on. We need to #deliver.
Very good. A question then from our online audience. Junior Isles asks, how long will it take to charge an EV at the electric forecourt?
Yeah, so it depends on the vehicle that you have and the battery. So we've got huge amounts of power. We've got a 5 megawatt grid connection, which could in theory put 20,000 miles of charge into electric vehicles in an hour. We also have a 6 megawatt hour battery that can store 24,000 miles of charge, and both can work together. So we don't have a shortage about how much power we can put into cars, how much energy we can put in. The actual ability to charge your batteries is controlled by the battery management system that protects the battery from degradation and so on. And the good news is everything is improving. We're on a very fast upward curve of higher power you know, abilities across multiple vehicles. And so in theory, at the moment, it might take 20 to 30 minutes, but in theory, we're thinking it's not very far away before people will be able to put, you know, 100 to 200 miles of charge in their vehicle within 10 to 20 minutes. In fact, some vehicles are already able to do that today.
Very good. Exciting times, Toddington, and delighted to have you share your ideas with us. We're running a little bit over in terms of duration. There are, once again, many more questions from the online audience, and I'll share those with you offline after the event. But I'd like to just open up the discussion now to you and your fellow panelists. So if I could open the floor up to everybody now, to all of our 5 speakers. Toddington, I understand that you might want to ask Mike Hughes at Schneider some questions about the partnerships side. Do you have a question for Mike?
Yeah, I mean, there's again, I kind of put the two together. It's partnerships and technology, because you can't just keep changing. You need to find the right solutions and work with people to deliver them. I was really excited to hear Mike. Some of the language that I use is very, very clear with the language you started with. It's about technology and so on. And what I'd be keen to see, so we use a lot of technology. We don't manufacture it, although we do work a lot of software. But from a technology perspective, just wondering if Mike wanted to share any further insights about what might be coming down the line. If there's any further opportunities that you see that accelerate efforts.
Yeah, I think Toddington, the way that we look at the whole technology play as Schneider Electric, as I was saying, is this is a very large journey, and no one company is going to be able to make it on its own. So we very much see it as a collaboration of various companies coming together with different expertise that they may have. So, for example, charging technology, battery technology, demand shedding, loading technology, and the software, etc. So as Schneider Electric, we're all about partnerships. We view that story of the grid of the future of being a collection of companies around some kind of common architecture. And here in the UK, I'd be happy to get in touch, because here in the UK, we have somebody who's dedicated to going out and trying to build those partnerships through our innovation arm, and constantly looking for technology partners that we as a company can work with, or indeed through our ventures arm can also invest in, where we see the technology as being a core part of that journey for the future. So very exciting space for us. And again, we're a great partnering company. We always have been.
Mike, continuing that theme of partnership, are there any questions that you have to any of the other panelists that you'd particularly like to ask?
No, and nothing particular. I mean, I think it's just a great overview of the entire chain of the EV story, from how do you charge it, how do you organize it if you're running a fleet, what is the technology that runs that grid, etc. So I think it's really just bringing back that whole story around saying there are many aspects to this journey. Today has been really just a great discussion on getting people to understand, what is behind the charger and all of the things that will need to happen, all of the partnerships and technologies that will need to be deployed if this is to be a success. And it will be a success. And I completely agree with Toddington. It's about just get on with it, but it's already happening. I mean, I want people to reflect on 30 years ago. If you were saying that, 30, 40, 50% of the UK's energy would already be coming from offshore wind, renewable energy, solar, people would never believe that. And yet here we are 30 years later doing it, okay? So I'm very positive about that there is momentum. I agree we should be going faster, because the climate change topic is really, really critical. But I'm also extremely positive that I see major movements happening. A government coming out and saying we want to have all fossil fuel vehicles no longer sold from 2035. I mean, that's a massive statement. So big change is coming, and I think it's happening already.
And Honda announced only yesterday that they are looking to electrify all of their vehicles by 2022, bringing that forwards by 3 years. So the change is perhaps being, which will come quicker, the policy side of things, the OEMs, or indeed the cultural side of things. And
maybe just a bit like Olly on that one. As Schneider, my role here in the UK, I have about 1,200 vehicles, and we're launching a plan for by 2025, they'll all be electric vehicles. So as the leases run out on existing vehicles, we're shifting entirely to electric. Now we're just one company. So everybody doing the same thing. This is going to accelerate very quickly in the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah. I'll perhaps go around the table then and ask each of the other panelists who they might like to ask a question of. Matt, choosing you first. Any questions you'd like to particularly ask any of the other panelists?
got a question for all of them, but I'll pick on Olly. I guess my question is, we've talked about technology, and that is hugely important, but the human intervention element to this, the user experience. I mean, people talk about the challenges of being able to go to AP. The personal experience for the individual is very important. Talking about range anxiety, more experience anxiety, but for a fleet, a van operator, driver, like what is that experience? Toddington has great ideas about for the general public, but for a van driver, what does that experience need to be like, feel like, experience like?
That's a great question, Matt. Hopefully you can all hear me. I've had to dial in via phone because of the connection. I'm an operator at heart. I actually ran sites in the network in DPD prior to my appointment of CSR. But I can tell you the culture in the business, the drivers, when you knew an electric vehicle was going to be delivered to the depot to go on fleet, the drivers would be biting your hand off to move to an electric vehicle. They really wanted to. The benefits of it, obviously not being labelled as driving around in nice vehicle, polluting, and as all the panel have talked about, the sort of culture and behaviour towards climate crisis and the change, and how people are very conscious about that, and maybe you can see that from the decisions that people are making now, and with that, drivers want to move over to that vehicle. They're automatic, they're quiet, they're the customer doorstep experience. People, the public are saying, "Wow, you're in an electric vehicle. What about that? That's so cool." And it's great seeing drivers obviously get, feed off that. It's lovely when you're out doing a job, whatever it is, and being praised for it, and that change. Don't get me wrong, there has been challenges. You cannot drive an electric vehicle as you would a petrol or diesel vehicle. So we've had to put a training process in place to ensure, the charge, the way to drive extends the range of that vehicle. And that's been one of the challenges. But as a whole, the drivers in the business are very eager to get into these vehicles. Really, they love them.
Great.
That's great to hear, Olly. I on my cycle into the office this morning, I saw one of your lovely green liveried vehicles on the road, and it was great to see that here in Oxford. Olly, do you have a question for one of the other panelists that you would like to ask?
Well, I think it's a question to all. I think the biggest challenge in electrification of fleet is the charging. And do you see, sort of the GRIDSERVE, the pivot power, sort of, can you see those taking over forecourts? We've got the government talking about potentially making it actually 2030, phasing out ICE vehicles. Can we see that happening in the next 10 years? Can we move that quickly? And if not, what support's needed to push that forward?
Could I, Toddington, I think probably the answer from you is yes. I'll hand over to you to answer in a little bit more of an involved way, but Charlie, perhaps you could also give an answer to that question too. Toddington, what would be your very brief answer to that question? Slightly less brief than yes.
The answer to that would be, reinforcing what Matt said. There isn't one road. There's a combination of solutions that are needed. We all need to do this. No company can do this together. No person can do this individually, by themselves. We need to come together. We need to do everything we can. This is a big opportunity that's big enough for all of us to do incredibly well with. And actually, we need all of us to make it happen. Come together. We need to knock it out of town. And I actually believe that if we do deliver, everybody, a combination of solutions is necessary. I think we can really make it happen.
Thanks very much, Toddington. Charlie, what would be your answer to that charging infrastructure question?
Yeah, so if you look at, where are people charging at home? Where are people charging? So the statistic that's normally shared is 80% of charging is done at home. That leaves around 10 to 15% of charging being done at the workplace. And you've got 5% charging is being done on the go. I think if you look at that in a bit more detail, what is the thing that prevents people from getting into an electric car? There's a few reasons, but one of the key reasons is what happens when I do long distance. Where the hell am I going to charge? So I think obviously Toddington and Matt, they're doing an amazing job on creating a much better solution for charging on the go. And it's great that, particularly GRIDSERVE in the last few weeks, the amount of press that they're getting on their new electric forecourt. It's really, really helpful to giving people who aren't yet an electric vehicle confidence that they can move so. But what you've got to remember, and linking into Olly's point, if 80% of charging is being done at home and 10 to 15% in the workplace, you've got a big fleet in the case of Mike, and a lot of those vehicles, they go from home to work 95% of the time. And how many miles is that? That's probably less than 30 to work and back. So if you can charge at home, if your workplace or your business provides chargers at work, then actually getting into an electric vehicle is pretty straightforward. So you've got to consider those percentages. You've got to consider, as a fleet operator, start with the low-hanging fruit. There's plenty of electrification you can do before it becomes a problem. So that would be my advice. Get in the vehicles, because once you start, firstly, you become less scared, because it's not actually that scary. And secondly, you get really good experience in how they work. And once you've done that, you have much more confidence, but also you can actually create a vision on how do I see myself getting to a 100% fleet, EV fleet, and it becomes much clearer. So as the guys said, just get on with it. Very good. Thank you very much indeed for that, Charlie. That get on with it message is one which I think has come through loud and clear. If I just highlight three themes that I think have come through from this morning's excellent discussion. One is speed. Toddington talking very much about delivery, the need to act, which you highlighted there, Charlie. Matt, Toddington, you used the argument about using the tools we have. Let's deploy that speed with the tools that we have. And clearly another major theme that's come through from all of the speakers this morning, very much from Mike in particular, is the need for partnership. So partnerships, deliver with the tools we have. Those are, I think, the key messages that came through this morning. So I'll just wrap up by thanking all of you on the panel. A brilliant exposition of what needs to happen in the drive to net zero. So thank you very much indeed, Mike Hughes from Schneider Electric, as our keynote speaker and as our partner on the event this morning. Thank you very much indeed to Toddington, Harper at GRIDSERVE, and to Olly Craughan from DPD, and to you, Charlie, from EO Charging. So thanks very much indeed, everybody, and thanks very much to our online audience for asking such insightful and incisive questions. I will therefore bring to a close this morning's panel discussion. Thank you very much indeed, our panelists. Thank you very much indeed, our online audience, and do join us again for another in the series of online events that the EV Summit hosts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.